Today I have just got another opportunity to come together and learn on a favorite subject, Power BI. And this is brought to you in association with Pomerol Partners. Now, for today, we have got a very special guest. So, we have got Leon Gordon with us, who is the founder of Microsoft Power BI UK User Group. He's a Microsoft MVP, he's partner at Pomerol Partners, and a member of Forbes Tech Council. Hey, Leon,
Hi,
how are
Pragati.
you?
Fantastic, thank you. How about yourself?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm just quite excited to host my first ever session here, and especially having you as a speaker. So yeah, I'm quite excited.
Oh, thank you. Me too. It's interesting, isn't it? That obviously from myself hosting it previously to now speaking here for the first time,
Yeah.
it's going to be very
And I
interesting.
think the best thing is Leon is really going to talk about a very interesting topic to get today, and it's about an introduction to machine learning in Power BI. So before we just start, so everyone just tell us where I am, from which part of the world are you in, because as this pandemic has just got us virtually and we are just able to connect so well. So just tell us from which part of the country or the world you are, so we just get to know you.
Oh, definitely. And as always, Pragati, I do have to mention the weather. We are heading into a heat wave in the UK. The sun is shining, although I haven't actually seen it outside yet today. But
Yeah, I think next week it is quite hot. It says like 34 degrees, which I saw this morning. Maximum, I think next week, Wednesday, it's going 34 degrees. So yeah, we may need fans. I already have a
excellent.
fan, but yeah, just need to take it out.
Oh, fantastic. I'm looking forward to it. I need to work on my tan a little bit.
Definitely. So yeah, I think Leon, it's let's just get started rather than wasting time, because I'm sure everyone is so excited for this session. So yeah, people keep telling us from which part of the world you are joining us, and yeah, Leon, just over to you. And yeah, I'll be away, but yeah, I can come in whenever you want me to. So yeah, good luck with your session.
Thank you very much. Hopefully you can see my screen okay.
Yeah, I can see your screen. Yeah, it looks good.
Fantastic. So thank you very much, everybody. We're here for today's session at the Microsoft Power BI UK User Group. As I mentioned, although founding the UK User Group nearly 2.5 years ago, this is actually my first time presenting. What I'll be presenting today is an introduction to machine learning in Power BI. Now, just a bit of a brief background. Pragati gave me a fantastic introduction, but please do feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. As Pragati mentioned, I'm currently a partner at Pomerol Partners, so feel free to come over to our website at pomerolpartners.com. Obviously, we would love to have you all with us in the Microsoft Power BI UK User Group. And for those of you that don't know, we also have the Data DNA Dataset Visualization Challenge, which is a monthly challenge where you can currently win where you can currently win $300 worth of Amazon vouchers every month by visualizing a data set. Pragati very kindly mentioned, I'm also an official member of the Forbes Tech Council and an executive contributor at Brains Magazine. So with that being said, let's take a look at what we're going to cover in today's session. So first and foremost, we're going to understand what is machine learning, often referred to as ML. Then we're going to take a look at how we can benefit from machine learning within Power BI. We'll also understand how we can create a machine learning model in Power BI Premium, or Premium per User, often referred to as PPU. And then we'll also look at how to create a machine learning model in Power BI for free, either using desktop, or also you can do this using Power BI Pro as well. After that, I'll then give you some resources to continue your learning. Now, with that being said, there's a couple of caveats ahead of today's session. We are going to cover a lot of material in a short space of time, okay? So I am going to gloss over some of the technical aspects, but please do feel free to reach out to me or wait for our more advanced session on machine learning in Power BI in the future. Okay, so first and foremost, what is machine learning? Well, machine learning is a branch of artificial intelligence, often referred to as AI, that teaches computers to do what comes naturally to humans and animals, which is to learn from experience. Machine learning algorithms use computational methods to learn information directly from data without relying on a predetermined equation as a model. Now, the key elements I want you to take away from this slide is that what we're looking to make the computer or machine do, which is to learn from experience and to learn information directly from data. Okay. So how can we benefit from machine learning within Power BI? Well, we have a number of benefits available to us that we can do within Power BI. With real-time predictions, we can look at customer churn analysis. We can predict fraud. And in today's session, we're going to look particularly at customer leads and conversion. So with that being said, I want to create a fictional company, and we have a problem with this company. They're currently spending £3 million per year on purchasing leads, and they have a very low conversion rate, actually a 4.3% conversion rate on their sales. Now, as you can see from our sales funnel up here, we have a large amount of leads that then go through the sales process before some of those leads, 4.3% to be exact, end up converting into a sale for this organization. So as we can see for this business, they're spending a large amount of their revenue on leads, and they also have a small amount of sales coming from these leads. So wouldn't it be great if we could minimize the lead spend and also heighten the conversion rate by being able to predict which leads are more than likely to convert? This would ultimately reduce the amount spent on leads because we'd be able to target leads that fit our criteria. And ultimately, by targeting leads that have a higher predictability to be able to convert to buyers for us, we would also see our conversion rate rise as well. So with that being said, how can we use machine learning in Power BI to solve this predicament? So I'm going to go into my first demo. Okay, so let's head over to our GitHub environment. Okay, hopefully you can all still see my screen. Okay, I will share the links to this as well, to the GitHub and also to the slides following the session. Okay, so to do this, let's take a look at some data from our fictional company. So first and foremost, I'm going to open our sales training.csv in a new tab. And I'm also going to open our prospective buyer CSV in a new tab. Now, just to set the scene, these two data sets, one of them is our leads data set. So this is where we're spending our £3 million per year on leads. And the other is going to be our historic customer data set. Okay, so let's take a look first and foremost at our prospective buyer CSV. Okay, so this is our lead data set. So within here, we can see that it's been given to us from a transactional system because we have our buyer key and an alternative key. We also have a first name and a last name for these leads, followed by age, marital status, gender, the lead's yearly income, the total amount of children that this lead has, the number of children at home, their education, occupation, whether they're a house owner or not, the number of cars they own, the city in which they live, the state province code, and their postal code. Okay, so as we mentioned, this is potential customers, our lead data. Now we have our sales training.csv, which is our historic customers. Now within the columns that we have available to us, we have age, marital status, and you'll see that there are a lot of common columns between the two data sets. Now the column to be aware of and to take into account with our sales training CSV is our buyer column. Now, this is a Boolean value for true or false, which represents if this individual was actually a purchaser or a buyer with our organization. And this is the column that we're going to use to base our predictions on to train our machine learning model. So with that being said, we've taken a look at both of our data sets, so our training data and our leads data. Now what we want to do is start to work with this in Power BI in the service. So let's go ahead and head over to our Power BI service, and we're going to go into our sandbox environment. Now this sandbox environment is a PPU environment, so premium per user. And in here, what I want to do to start this process off is to create a new data set. A new data flow even. So to do this, I'm going to go to new in the top left hand here. I'm going to select data flow. And because we now have data marts available to us in preview, Power BI is actually going to prompt me if I want to use a data mart instead. Now, for the purposes of today's session, I'm going to remain with the data flow. So I'm going to go ahead and say no, create a data flow. Okay. Now, once this has been done, we'll be guided through the familiar process in how to create a data flow. So for us, what we want to start off to do is to define a new table. So to do this, we're going to choose a data source to define the tables for our data flow. So let's go ahead and select Add New Tables. Okay. Once this loads, we'll be presented with the familiar Power Query Online screen. Okay, for the purposes of this, I'm just going to go back to my GitHub CSV files, and I'm actually going to just go to the raw versions of those files, which will allow us to be able to take the URLs directly from GitHub into Power Query Online to start to ingest our data into the Power BI service. So I'm just going to select our data source, which is going to be a text to CSV data source. And we're going to be presented with our wizard to walk through to connect to a data source, and it's going to ask us for our connection settings here. So as I mentioned, we want to go ahead and get the raw version of our URL, come back across to Power Query Online, paste this in, and this is going to be our sales training data set, and we can go ahead and select next. Okay. Now, in the background, Power BI is going to pass that data for the first 200 rows to identify the underlying data types and also identify that the first row is actually headers within this CSV. We can notice this because we have our data types defined in the top left of each columns, and our first row has been promoted to be our headers. So we can go ahead and select Transform Data. And in this scenario, we don't need to make any further transformations to our sales training data. So we can go ahead and save and close. Okay. So just while that passes out in the background, I'm going to go back to our GitHub, and we're going to get our raw URL for our remaining data. Now, Power BI in the service will ask you if you want to create a name for your data flow. So let's go ahead and call this ML dash, let's go for UK UG. Now, if you are doing this in your own environments, please always make sure that you put a description here. Now, this description will benefit other developers that you may have, and also individuals in the organization that are using your data flows. So I'm just going to call this is a test data flow. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and save this data flow. And then we'll be prompted to see if we would like to schedule a refresh or refresh this data flow now. Now, for the purposes of this demonstration, we don't want to do either. So I'm just going to close this pop-up screen. And now we have our sales training data within our data flow. So next, we want to go ahead and add another table. Okay. And in this instance, we want to go ahead and add our lead data in exactly the same manner as we added our sales training data. So by going ahead and selecting text CSV, we've already copied our file path or URL, a URL in this instance, and we can go ahead and select next. Now, once again, in the background, Power Query Online will go ahead and pass the first 200 rows of that data. And again, it will promote the headers, promote the first row as headers, and also define the data types within those columns as well. So let's go ahead and select Transform Data. Again, as with the previous table, we don't need to make any additional transformations here. So we can go ahead and select Save and Close. Excellent. Once again, Power BI will ask us if we want to refresh that data. And at this moment in time, we don't want to at all. Okay, so let's select Close on that. Simple and easy steps. We now have both of our data sets available to us within the Power BI service. So as we can see here, we have our training data, which is historic customer sales. And we also have our prospective buyer data, which is now our lead data. So that's great. But now we want to go ahead and create a machine learning model to predict whether our leads will actually be buyers with us or not. So to do so, at the top here, we have our machine learning models, which we can go ahead and select. And then we'll be greeted with a nice, friendly UI that's going to talk us through exactly what we're going to do within the Power BI service to create and train our machine learning model. So as we can see here in step 1, we're going to create and train our model. So to do this, we're going to select our training data. So this is selecting the base data to train our model. We're then going to choose a model type.
Sorry to interrupt you. I think your voice is not very clear. It's cracking. So can you try to set your audio settings once?
Yep, no problem at all. Is
Yeah.
that any better for you now?
No, it's same. It actually adds a crackling sound to your not to your voice basically.
Okay, just bear with me a moment. Let's take a look at some of these StreamYard settings.
Yeah, I think it's a very little disturbance with your voice.
Let's see how we get on with that. Is that
Oh
any
yeah,
better?
this is much better. Thank you.
Excellent.
Continue.
Fantastic. No problem at all. So I'll just pick up from where I left off there. So first and foremost, we're going to create and train our model. So we're going to select training data. So we're going to select the base data to be able to train our model. And then we're going to choose a model type. So to do this, we're going to identify the best machine learning model to help us achieve our business goals, okay? Then we're going to go ahead and train our machine learning model, and we're going to be presented with a report on how that machine learning model performed. Finally, we're going to look to improve that model, so by iterating and retraining before applying that model directly to our lead data to be able to get our predictions back. So let's go ahead and get started. Excellent. So first and foremost, we're going to be asked what we would like to predict. So to do this, we want to choose a table, the table being our sales training data, and the column that we want to predict is the outcome of a buyer. So let's go ahead and select buyer. Once we've done this, we can go ahead and select next. And again, in the background, Power BI will pass the underlying information being presented to it, and it will actually recommend to us a machine learning model. In this instance, it's actually recommended a binary prediction model, which is predicting whether or not an outcome will be achieved. In this instance, this is actually the correct model. So Power BI has correctly identified the model that we would like to use. If it hadn't, we can go ahead and select a different model here, whereby we'll be presented with different types of classification and regression models. Now, as I mentioned, a binary prediction model is used to predict an outcome, and the eventuality of this is to use to predict the likelihood of a sales lead converting or the probability of a customer responding to a marketing campaign. So this is actually perfect and the actual ideal classification model we want. If it wasn't, we could also choose between a general classification model, which is generally used for classifying credit card applicants into groups of those who have good credit, bad credit, or those that require further analysis. And finally, we could also identify a regression model, which is generally used for number prediction and could be used for house prices and prediction of house market values based on regional factors. As I mentioned, we're going to go ahead and use the binary prediction model. So I'm going to go ahead and select this. And now we want to choose our target outcome. So in this instance, the outcome that we're interested in is whether or not that buyer, whether the individual was a buyer. So whether the buyer was yes. Now, when we get a match with our prediction, we want to go ahead and say buyer as our label. And if we get a prediction mismatch, we want to go ahead and select not a buyer. So now we've defined our outcome and how we're going to label those outcomes. We can go ahead and select next. Now, once again, in the background, Power BI in the service will pass the information being presented to it, and it will give us some recommendations on the columns within our data set. Now, in machine learning, generally, the columns are referred to as features. So from this moment forward, I will be referring to these as features. So whether or not these features have a high or low correlation with the outcome of a buyer. Now we can see here the Power BI has recommended that marital status, gender, the number of children at home, and so on and so forth actually have a low correlation with buyer. So it's recommended for us not to choose those columns. Now, for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm actually going to choose those columns, and you'll see why as we progress through the demo. Okay. So once you have your column or feature selection, you can go ahead and select next. And then we get to name and train our model. So I'm going to name this model ML UK UG. And as always, please do go ahead and give this a description. Not only does it help other developers within your team, it also helps members within your organization that may have access to this model further down the line. Okay, so let's define this as a test model. And I'm going to go ahead. Now, in this instance, we can select how long we would like to train our model for. Now, the default selection, as we can see here, is 120 minutes, but we can also go up to 360 minutes or down as low as 5 minutes. Now, I don't know about yourselves, but whenever I practice or I'm trying to learn something new, the more time I spend on developing this skill, the better I get at some things anyway. So the longer you train your model for, the likelihood that your predictions will be more accurate is actually higher. So I would say in your instances, please do try and train your models for as long as possible. But as we're doing a demonstration in today's session, this webinar, I'm going to set this down to 5 minutes. Okay. So what will happen next? Well, in the background, Power BI will actually take 80% of the model within our data to iterate and train and make its predictions based off of. For the remaining 20% of the data within our data set, it will then run those predictions against it to test the outcome of those predictions. Okay. So with that being said, we can go ahead and select Save and Train. Once we've done that, in a similar manner to how data sets would refresh in the service, we can now see that our data flow is currently refreshing. Now, this is going to go on for 5 minutes or so, as that's the training time that we presented to the machine learning model. Pragati, at this moment in time, I'll just pause to see if there's any questions at all.
Yeah, actually, you can take up maybe one question.
Okay.
So this question has been asked by Juan Laura. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. So he just asked, like, what's the best way to split the data into training and test? In my case, is a past due credit collection follow-up log. Some credits are being collected, some not, and any particular advice. So yeah, he's just basically asking what things you keep in mind while splitting the data into training and test.
Oh, definitely. So in this instance, we don't have a choice. So when we're using Power BI in the service and we're using the machine learning methodology within data flows, it automatically presents an 80% and 20% split. So 80% of the data being used to train and 20% being used to test. Okay. Generally, there's no rule of thumb as such. Sometimes I opt for 50-50 when I do this in Python. Other times I scale up and go to 80-20. It really depends on the model, and I would always say test, test, test.
Thanks. Thank you, Leon. Maybe we can take another question if that's fine.
Yeah, that's fine.
So Ashish is asking, is the time dependent on the size of the data?
Not really, to be honest. As I mentioned, generally with machine learning models, you want to try to train them for as long as possible. The reason being is that as you iterate through the training, the predictions should, over time, become more accurate. As I mentioned, 5 minutes isn't really enough time for a large amount of iterations. As you iterate through the data, the pattern recognition and classification, it becomes more accurate. So I would say it's not dependent on the size of the data, it's more dependent on the amount of time and resources you have available.
Thanks, Leon. I hope that answers your question, Ashish. Thank you.
Excellent. Excellent. So what I'm going to do at this moment is pick up from a previously run data flow. So we can pick up from where it would leave off once it's actually refreshed. So once you've actually gone ahead and created your machine learning model, it's refreshed for the first time, you'll now be presented with this screen, which allows you to go into the report. So you remember when we looked at the UI, we were going to be given a report back based on the performance of our training of the model. So we can now click into this report, and I'm just going to go through some of the areas of interest within this report. Again, we're not going to go into too much technical detail during this session as it's only an introduction, but there are some key areas to be aware of. So let's just go back to the first tab of our report. And whilst it does that, I'm just going to get up an image for us as well, which is going to be our confusion matrix. Okay, so excellent. That report is just loading up for us in the background. And whilst it does this, as I mentioned, we're going to be looking at the performance of the model, analyzing our top predictors, looking at the accuracy of the model performance, and also understanding some of the underlying training details. Okay, so first and foremost, as I believe it was Juan mentioned earlier, our model tells us how it was actually evaluated. So we can see that here we had a test set of 1,563 records, which we used to be tested against for the predicted outcomes. In terms of our model performance, without going into, again, too much detail in this session, generally the higher the number, the better the model performance. Now, as I mentioned previously, in terms of our features and Power BI recommending to us that some features had a low correlation with our outcome, we can now see this here by selecting our top predictors. Okay. By selecting top predictors, we can now see our top predictors by influence. Now, Power BI rightly called out that a number of these features have a low correlation with the outcomes that we're looking for. So the reason I selected them is because I wanted you to be able to see them in this visualization here. So by selecting on some of these values, we can start to see how the patterns start to arise within our data. So, for example, the top predictor, or the top feature being used as a predictor for when we have a buyer, is actually age. Now, generally, our buyers for our organization are either 46 or less, or 46 to 59. So generally 59 and below. Their marital status is generally single. So just go ahead and select this. And also, they generally have a total amount of children, which is 1. Okay, as we can see here. So now we're starting to identify some patterns within classifying who our buyers actually are for our organization. We can go ahead and close this splash screen. And now we're presented with what's referred to as a confusion matrix. Now, please don't run away when you see this type of visualization, as it's quite straightforward to understand. Now, we can see here, and I'm just going to go across to this visual here. Now, what we're most interested in is the green values within a confusion matrix. So a true positive. Now, a true positive refers to when a prediction has been accurately predicted to be positive, and a true negative is when a prediction that the individual is not a buyer has actually truly been predicted to be negative. So we're saying here that our machine learning model has actually predicted both of these values correctly. Now, in terms of the false negatives and the false positives, these values mean that our machine learning model has incorrectly been able to identify whether the individual was a buyer or not a buyer. So just bear that in mind as we go back to this visual here. So we know we're most interested in these two rows or values here. So we're trying to identify if an individual is actually a buyer. So we have a high performance in this being predicted correctly, although we have a very high performance in this value with it not being a buyer, being incorrectly predicted by our model. Now, to interact with this, we have something available to us called recall and precision, as we can see here. Now, if I adjust to increase our precision, we can see how this affects our numbers, and this will just update. Now we can start to see that our positives as such, our positive predictions has actually gone down, but our positive non-bias has actually risen as well. So a good starting point for this value in between precision and recall is generally 0.5, but again, you have to adjust this based on what you're actually looking to identify. And for us, like I say, we're interested in this top left-hand value here, which is predicting when an individual will actually be a buyer for us. Now, there are some more values available to us in this report, like a cost-benefit analysis. But again, as we're against time in this session, I'm going to go on to the accuracy report tab. Okay. So I'm just going to scroll back to the top. And again, we go into a bit more detail here in terms of model performance, the area under the ROC curve, cumulative gains. And again, just to gloss over this at a high level, we can be interested in this visualization to our left here. Okay. Now, within this visualization, we can start to see that the ideal performance is this teal line at the top here. So the ideal performance of our model sits at the upper leftmost. At the bottom leftmost, we also see what a random guess would be. So ideal prediction being the teal line, a random guess as a prediction being the black line here. So we can see that our model's performing generally in between the two. Okay, so it's not performing too badly. Now, as we move on to our final tab, which is our training details, we start to understand a bit more in regards to the question that we were asked by Ashish in terms of how long should we train our model for. So we start to see a breakdown of how many rows were actually sampled, how many of those rows were training rows, and how many iterations were run within the time period. So this is, remember, iterating over the data to be able to base the predictions and classify the underlying data there. So we can start to see the performance and model quality over those iterations. And again, if we were running this for a longer period of time, we would see a lot more iterations than just the 32 that we have here. We go into a bit more detail, as I mentioned, in terms of the featurization. So this is, as I mentioned, the columns from earlier, and then some of the final parameters that were selected within our model before we could go ahead and apply our model. Okay, so once we're happy, we've iterated, we've retrained if needed, and we've changed some of our precision and recall parameters, we can go ahead and apply our model. Now, once you select that, you'll be presented with your input table. Now, if you remember, what we're trying to do here is actually predict our prospective buyers, so our lead data. So we need to select our prospective buyer table. We need to have a new column for our prediction values. I'm going to call this outcome. And as you remember, we presented 0.5 as our threshold earlier as a safe starting point. Now, if you are following along with this, then please go ahead and select save and apply. But for the purposes of this, as we've already ran this, I'm going to go ahead and cancel and go back to our data flow screen. So once you've actually applied your machine learning model to your lead data, we'll now be presented with another 4 tables within our data flow. Okay, so we can now see our training data. So this is the rows that we use to train and base those predictions on. We now have that 20% left of data, which is our testing data. And a table that we're most interested in is our prospective buyer enriched buyer prediction table, because this is our new table, or sorry, our lead table, which now has our new prediction column. Okay, at this moment in time, we're now completed within the Power BI service, and we can go ahead and launch Power BI Desktop and connect to the Power BI service to start to iterate and understand and interact with our newly predicted data. So to do so, we're just going to launch Power BI Desktop. We're going to go ahead and get data directly from our Power BI workspace. And we just see how this loads. At the moment in time, if there are any questions, happy to jump in, but also
Sorry, Leon, we just
okay. So let's go
missed
ahead and
you.
select Get Data.
Leon, can you just go back and mention a few things, because we just lost you for a minute?
Okay, what was the last point that you heard from myself?
I think when you were showing in Power BI service. So
Okay,
so
no
before
problem at
opening
all.
Power BI Desktop, I think you were finishing a few things in Power BI service, right?
Yep, no problem at all. Let's just jump back.
Thank you.
So the table that we're most interested in is our new prospective buyer enriched buyer prediction table, okay? Because this is our lead data, which now has our machine learning model prediction column applied to it. So now that we've applied this within the service, we can go ahead and connect to this data using Power BI Desktop. So now, once we've opened Power BI Desktop, we've selected Get Data, and I'm now going to go ahead and select Data Flows as our source. Okay, we're going to use Power BI Data Flows, and we're going to go ahead and connect. Okay, so it's just going to establish a connection to our Power BI workspace. And we're going to go ahead and select our sandbox workspace once this is presented to us. And within our sandbox workspace, the data flow that we're interested in is actually ML webinar deployed, as this has previously been run successfully. And the table that we're interested in is our prospective buyer enriched buyer prediction data set. Now, what you'll notice is that this is our lead data. We can see this because we have our transactional keys from our source system. We also have our first name and our last name, but ultimately we now have some additional columns. Okay, let's just scroll to the right. So we now have our buyer prediction outcome, which is our machine learning model prediction. We also have a prediction score against that, which is the scoring of how accurate that prediction is likely to be. And we have some further information around the prediction explanation. Now, this is a column that goes into some detail in terms of why the machine learning model predicted the prediction it did. We also have an index as well. So we're not too interested in those two columns, but the columns of interest for us is the outcome and the scoring of that outcome. So let's go ahead and load that data directly into Power BI Desktop. Okay, I'm not going to make any transformations within Power Query for the purposes of this demonstration. So we can just go ahead and close and apply. Okay, and that will just refresh that data and load it into Power BI Desktop for us. And then we'll be able to present back to you our final lead data set and the power that we've just achieved using Power BI, either premium or premium per user as well. Excellent. This isn't a large data set, so it's going to take a couple of moments to load. Fantastic. Now we can go into our fields. And as I mentioned, the information that we're actually interested in is, let's go for our first name, our last name. So this is the first and last name of our leads. Just going to expand this. We're just going to create some very basic visualizations. We're going to take a look at the outcome, which is the prediction that we're most interested in, and also the prediction score as well. For the purposes of this, I'm also going to create a very rudimentary slicer as well. Okay, now what we can start to see is that we have all of our leads here and a prediction outcome and the weighting of that scoring as well. So I'm just going to sort this descending, and I'm going to filter our leads so that we can see those that are being predicted to actually be a buyer with us. So this is very powerful in terms of we can give this to our sales team and say, hey, start calling from the top to the bottom. This is where our model has predicted that we're going to have our sales. These individuals can become buyers for us. And alternatively, we can also filter this to where the likelihood of these individuals becoming buyers with us is actually false. Okay, so we can start to wean out these type of leads, ultimately reducing our lead spend. And like I say, by selecting true, we can also start to target those that have a higher likelihood of actually converting into buyers with us. So that's how you can use Power BI Premium or Premium per user to identify leads that have a high likelihood of converting and those that also don't have a high likelihood of converting. So that's great. I'm just going to go back to our demonstration. And sorry, I got caught up in the moment. I should have pressed Shift F5 as opposed to F5. So just bear with me. Okay. So perfect. So we just learned how we can use machine learning in Power BI Premium or Premium per user. And what we're going to do next is identify a way of how we can actually do this for free in either Power BI Desktop or Power BI Pro using Python. So don't worry, we're going to make the machine learn again, but although this robot doesn't look very happy, no machines were actually harmed in the making of this webinar. So for us to begin, we have a couple of prerequisites and some limitations to this approach, okay? So by going down this route, we have no machine learning ops available to us, so ML ops. We can only use the personal gateway in this scenario. This becomes difficult to manage dependencies as well, and it's not very scalable, okay? So just to get those limitations out of the way first and foremost. Okay, so to do this, we need to actually use some alternative tools within Power BI. So what are those alternative tools? Well, first and foremost, we want to get a tool or a library called Anaconda. Now, Anaconda is by far the easiest way to put together a machine learning environment, Python and R data science environment on your system. And we're also going to use a Python library called PyCaret, which is an open source low code machine learning library in Python created by a gentleman called Moez Ali. Okay, so with that being said, let's just escape. And we're going to go ahead and start to identify some of those tools. Okay. Now, this system already has these tools installed, but you'd like to go ahead and go over to anaconda.com to download the Anaconda distribution. And also, if you do face any errors once you are installing either Anaconda or any of the associated libraries, then you may need to also install the Microsoft C++ build tools as well. Okay, so once you've fulfilled that and Anaconda's been installed, you can go over to your command prompt. You can search for the Anaconda prompt. Okay, now we can just select Anaconda prompt here, and this will open up our command line interface for Anaconda. Now, as you can see, I'm currently in what's noted as a base environment. Okay. Now you can think of the base environment or environments as they are, which is environments or containers or folder structures for the environments you're going to create. Now, for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm actually going to activate a new environment. So to do so, it's very simple. We just type activate, and then I'm going to call this data science underscore UG. Okay, so once you've done that and hit enter, you'll notice that we now change from our base environment over to data science underscore UG. And what we want to do to get started within this new environment is install a package manager. Now, that package manager for Python is called pip. So to do this, we very simply use the conda command. We then use the install command, followed by the package, which, like I mentioned, is going to be pip. Now, all of the requirements have been satisfied on this system. It may ask us to do an update. If it does, I won't do the update, but it might take slightly longer on your side when you're doing a fresh install for the first time. Okay. Excellent. So it's just going to go ahead and collect the package metadata in the background there. I believe this system does require an update, so I won't go ahead and update as part of this webinar. Excellent. So I'm just going to select no. Okay, fantastic. And then once that's actually installed, you can then use the pip command to go ahead and install PyCaret. Okay, so go ahead and hit enter. As I mentioned, this is already satisfied on this system, so it's going to run through it relatively quickly. And once this is completed, we now have our environment, after a few lines of code, ready for us to begin using Python, particular PyCaret within Power BI. So we now have our environment. How do we make Power BI aware of this environment? So first and foremost, we want to go ahead and go to Power BI Desktop, select File, Options and Settings. We then want to go to Options, and we'll be greeted with our familiar options splash screen. We want to go to Python scripting, which is in the global options. We want to set our home directory to other, and you want to navigate to your Anaconda free install, go to your environments and select the environment that you've just created. Okay. Once you've done that and entered those values into Power BI, go ahead and select OK, and you're now set up to be able to, you now have Python integrated into Power BI to be able to start using Python scripting. Okay, that's fantastic. So now our environment is set up, we need data. Okay, so let's go ahead and start a new Power BI desktop file. I'm going to go through a couple of the stages of how you ingest the CSVs from GitHub, because it's different to how we did it on the Power Query Online version. And then I'm going to move over to a previously created version of this file because I'm conscious that we are running low on time and we still have a little bit to cover. Okay. So let's go ahead and select Get Data. Now in Power BI Desktop, we'll be presented with our data source splash screen. Just take a couple of moments to load. Just close down. Okay. So in this environment, previously when we were in Power Query Online, we selected text CSV. Now, once we're connecting to our CSV via Power BI Desktop, we actually want to select Web. Okay, so once we've selected Web, we can go ahead and select Connect. And we can go ahead and use our URL from earlier. Hopefully we still have it saved. Let's do our sales training. URL, hit OK. And again, Power BI, or Power Query, should I say, in the background will go ahead, pass the first 200 rows of that data, and present back to us some options. Now, unfortunately, in Power BI Desktop and Power Query Desktop, it doesn't identify correctly that the first row is actually headers, and also it doesn't define the data types. So we have to go in and do some transformations to our data to, like I say, make the first row headers, and also to define our data types, okay? If you're not familiar with how to do that, then you have the option here to use the first row as headers, which will promote your first row to headers, and also you can define your data types by either selecting here, or you can also use mscript. It's totally up to you. I'm not going to do that, as I mentioned, conscious of time, so let's go ahead and get some more data, okay? We want to go back to our new source, select web. We have our sales training data. We now want to get our lead data. So we're going to again copy the raw version of that URL into our web connector. Go ahead, select OK, and follow the now familiar steps of selecting OK. And again, in your scenario, promoting the first row to headers and defining any data types, okay? Now, in an effort to stay on time, I'm going to move across to a version of this file that we've already created previous to this session, that already has the data loaded into it, okay? So we're going to go ahead and go into edit our query, and I will just talk through these steps at a high level, and a number of ways that you can do this as well within Power Query. So let's start off with our sales training day, okay? So as you can see in our applied steps here, we've promoted our headers, we've already changed our types, but we have a new step, which is to run a Python script, okay? So to do so, on the top ribbon here, you can go to transform and select run Python script. Now, once you select this value, you'll be presented with this screen, okay? Which is a normal editor that allows you to input some Python script into. Now, fortunately, for those that are following this along, if you go back over to our GitHub directory, you'll notice that we have some files that are labeled 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, so what you can do is just open those up. This through, okay? So again, I'm not going to go into too much detail around, let's go through it at a high level because, like I say, very conscious of time. Okay. So our first script here, all we want to do is copy this out. So you'll go to the raw version and copy that script. And for our training data, you want to go ahead and paste that script into the Run Python script window. Go ahead and select OK, and you'll be presented with three new tables. Now, within Python, we have something called data frames, and any data frames that you create within your script will be presented back to you at the end of the script running. The one that we're interested in is df_imputed, and we can go ahead and select that version. And now what this is doing is actually encoding our feature values so that we can use them within PyCaret to be able to base our machine learning predictions off of. Okay, now what I mean by that is you can see that here in gender and in marital status. So for gender in this data set, we have two values, being male and female, and you can see that they've actually been encoded to 0.0 and 1.0. And similarly to marital status, which was previously single and married, they again have been encoded to 0.0 and 1.0. Now this is a necessary step for us to be able to use the PyCaret library. Okay, so once that step's complete, we can go ahead and run another Python script, which again will present to us the splash screen. And we can go ahead to our second file and copy the script out and paste the script directly into our run Python script. Now, what's happening here is this step is what we were doing in the AutoML in Power BI service of actually training the model, okay? So this is doing all of the splitting and basically going ahead and training our model and defining our model. So once that's completed and you've entered that, you'll be presented with what's called the predictions, the predictions based on the machine learning model having run through. Now, when you do this within Power Query and Power BI Desktop, what will happen is on your training data, your additional column will actually be applied to the training data. Okay. Hopefully, I can show you this and it loads fairly quickly. If not, we can move on. I can come back to this, just conscious of time, and I'm sure there'll be some questions as well. Okay. So at this moment in time, once this script has actually successfully run and you have your predictions, your machine learning model has actually completed running, and it spits out something called a pickle object, which is the model metadata, which in this instance is saved locally and then applied back to our lead data as we move through. Okay. Whilst that's just loading in the background, I'm actually going to go over to our lead data. Now, as I mentioned before, our lead data is actually, like I mentioned, our perspective by a CSV, and you can see that we've gone through the necessary steps of promoting headers. And first and foremost, in exactly the same manner as what we did to our training data, we ran a Python script. Okay. Now, those of you following along can go over to GitHub to script number 3. Okay, this script, and what it's doing is exactly the same as what we did in the previous data set, and it's imputing or encoding the values, which we will see here, so they can be run through the next Python script, which applies the machine learning model to our lead data. Okay. I guess while that's applying in the background, I can see a few people are asking for the GitHub link. So what I'll do, just whilst that's going, is I'll just copy this across into StreamYard for you, okay? Giving away our streaming secrets, but but at least everybody has access to the GitHub whilst we're doing the session as opposed to after it. Okay. So once that data has been imputed, and again, you can see that, let's go across to marital status. You can see that we're encoding to the separate values, and same for gender. We can go ahead and run our Python script. Now, the next Python script we're going to run is arguably the smallest, but the one that probably does the most power. So again, you can get this script directly from our GitHub, which is file number 4. You can copy this directly into the Power BI file. And what we're doing here is applying our machine learning model that we've defined to our lead data set. So once you select OK here, our final run, which is our predictions. Okay. Now, what happens here is we're adding our outcome column to our lead data. Now, the reason I've gone through and done it this way in applied steps is to show you how you can do this directly in Power BI and use Python within Power Query to directly work on your data. Now, to be honest, the best way to do this is to actually define the Python script in a single script, which I've done so. Over here, back in our GitHub, I can just show you very briefly. So Python end-to-end ML dot. In this large script here, we're applying every single one of those steps, including importing the data directly into the Python script. Now, this is the most performant way to do this. This is the easiest way for source control, and it applies everything in a single step. Now, to do this and use this within Power BI, you have to use a Python script as your source, okay? So I'll go on to this in a moment in Python_leads, where I'll show you that we've just imported directly from the Python script, and we've eradicated the need for all of these steps. So what you can see here finally is that we now have 2 new columns on our lead data, one being the label, which is the prediction, and we also have the associated score. Now, as you may remember, what we did when we imputed this data is we got rid of our first names and last names. So I go through some more steps in here just to merge the queries back together so we can actually get our first names and last names back to present them. But ultimately, as I mentioned, we should really be using our Python_leads, which, as we can see here, our data source can just be a Python script. We can paste directly our whole script into Power Query. We can also do some cleanup by deleting all of the unnecessary data frames. Select OK, and we have the output. Again, a condensed version of the output as well, which I'll just close this in a moment and show you, available to us in just a single step. Okay. So with that being said, I'm going to close this rather than close and apply, as this has previously been loaded. And again, very conscious that we're close to the hour. And we're going to go back to here, and I'm just going to take our Python leads data, which is based on the Python script. Go to first name, last name. Also, we're going to get the score, and we're going to get the label. I'm just going to change the order of those around. Okay, so what we can see here is the same table that I presented to you in Power BI Premium or Premium per user. And again, I'm just going to apply a rudimentary filter on the outcome. And we're going to sort our scoring. Okay, and then we can just filter our data again, so we can have our leads that have a predictability of actually becoming buyers for us, and alternatively we can filter our leads that don't have or have a predictability of not being a buyer for us. Now, as I mentioned, this table Python_leads is based on the end-to-end ML script, but just to show this based on what would be with the applied steps, we can go back to our leads table. We can get our first name, our last name, our label, and our score. And ultimately, using the Power Query applied steps in Python, we can achieve exactly the same goal with both outcomes. So again, we'll just sort this. And again, we can, using our rudimentary slicer, we can filter our data to present both alternatives back to the business. So what we've seen there is how we can use Power BI Premium, Premium per user, or Python for free or with Power BI Pro to do classification machine learning models within Power BI that have a high return on investment for the business. So with that being said, I'm just going to jump back to our presentation. Okay. So we now have a vision. Okay, and here's how we can take it to a new level. We can start to look at outlier detection using PyCaret, topic distribution, and also we can go into some association rule mining as well. So as I did mention, I will give you access to some more resources. So a very good book to read is Extending Power BI using Python and R by my good friend and fellow MVP, Luca Zavarella. We also have you can go to KD Nuggets, which those of you that are involved in data science, I'm sure will be aware of, is a fantastic resource for more information on machine learning and data science in general. Similarly for Towards Data Science. Also, please do go to anaconda.com. It's by far the easiest way to get your system up and running for data science. And Microsoft also do have a lot more further information on how we can use machine learning within the Power BI service. And I do need to give a shout out to fellow MVP Ryan Wade as well. He also has a book available which goes into a lot of great detail in terms of utilizing Python and R within Power BI. So with that being said, we'll now stop for any questions, and hopefully everybody enjoyed this session. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen, Pragati.
Hey, Leon, that was a great presentation. I mean, I think we discussed this before. I always tried bringing in Azure machine learning train model in Power BI, but I never got to do how to get that done. But I think it's time to try it again, just seeing the way you did it and showed it. So yeah, we have got a few questions.
Excellent.
So yeah, let me come back to a few questions. So I think one question that was asked by Idris was, is the auto ML feature available on Power BI Pro license?
No. So this is a premium per user and premium only feature. And this is one of the reasons why we go through this session at a very high level. As I'm sure everyone's aware, we try to cover a lot of content. But one of the reasons why I want to get the Python demo in here as well, because utilizing Python or even R is the way to get around the license fee.
Thanks, Leon. And then there's another question from Vandana. So what she's asking is, how it will take into account the time for training. So by time she means is that if we are training 80% of the data, so where time is coming into picture?
So you'll see that we defined the time earlier. So what I would say, the best definition I can give to this, at least from a beginning perspective, is try to train for as long as you can. You will notice what is working for your model and what is not, but the longer you can train, generally the better.
Cool. I think we have got a few more questions. Let's go. So there's a question from Rita. Can the use case be reorganized with respect to the credit card portfolio for credit card defaulter?
Yeah, you can. So when we touched base on the different types of classification in the Power BI service, you'll notice that we used binary prediction. But we also have different types of models that we can train, both in the Power BI service and also using PyCaret as well. So for that type of use case, we can definitely go ahead and build models for that, both in premium per user and premium, and in using Python or even R as well.
Cool, makes sense. I think that answered your question. Then there's another question from Hosni. So I think when you were showing the data, so the question is like, could you share the URL of the data? Is that
Yes,
in the
so
Git repository link that you shared?
it is indeed. So what I did towards the end of the session was just shared across the GitHub repo URL. Now within that GitHub repo is everything apart from the Power BI PBIX files. So all of the Python scripts, all of the data that we've gone through today is available there.
So I've just put that link in the chat again, guys. If you have missed it, then just you can just get it from there. So I've just pasted a GitHub link from Leon's message. So yeah, just stick it from there. Okay, I think there's one more thing. I think you showed how to copy paste the script from Git, right? So Vanna is asking, can you please tell the use case of copy pasting the script from Git?
So generally, I wouldn't copy and paste the script from Git because I would typically write it on my machine in either VS Code or an IDE called Spider. The reason that it's on Git and I've copy and pasted it is for the purpose of this webinar. Generally, what you would do is you would clone the GitHub repo to your local machine. You would then be able to open this directly in the IDE of your choice. Most people use Visual Studio Code or Spider or even Visual Studio nowadays, and you can interact with the code however you would like to. Like I say, we're quite confined by the time of the session in terms of how we interact, so it's easier just to copy and paste for today.
Thanks, Leon, on that. Then I think Mubar asked, where is the GitHub directory? So Mubar, I have just pasted the GitHub link that Leon shared. So yeah, you can get everything that he used for the demo from that link.
Yes.
Cool. Okay, so Ashish is asking a question where he's asking, like, do you have a recording for another model being applied to this data set?
No, I can't say I do, because what we would do is we would always, for this use case, we would always use the binary prediction model, because like I say, we're trying to identify an outcome being either true or false. In terms of has this session been delivered before and is it available, then yes, it is. But generally for this data set, we would use this type of classification model.
Okay, cool. And I think there are also some good examples on Microsoft's Azure GitHub repository. I think I shared that link earlier. So any of you guys are obviously, fancy training some other models on the similar kind of data that you're working with, then you can just go and check that, because they have really built some learning models there, which you can directly import as well. So yeah, go and check that link. I did share that earlier. So in the chat, just go and check that link as well.
Yeah, very, very good point there, Pragati. And the way things are currently in the data space, the likes of Kaggle, data science, as I mentioned, KD Nuggets, there is a plethora of information available
Cool.
in terms of how to go through some of these concepts.
Okay, so the next question is again from Idris. So he's asking, can we run models like KNN, decision tree, and other advanced model on this feature?
Depends which feature you're referring to. So if you're referring to how we ran the model in Power BI premium or premium per user? The answer is we're constrained to what's presented back to us via the UI and the wizard. Now, can we do this in Python using PyCaret? Yes, we can. It's just down to your expertise and what your preference is.
Cool. I hope that answers your question. Then there's one last question we got from Rita again. So he's saying like PyCaret itself contains splitting the data for training and testing. Then why did we choose ski learn train test split method?
Just the way I put this together, to be honest, based on how I present and put together my Python scripts, it's the age old how many ways can we tie our shoelace or slice bread. The GitHub repo is open and available. Please do feel free to clone, fork the code, and if there are better ways to do things, then please come back to me. Like I say, this is the method I chose for this. I prefer sklearn's train test split method. I haven't actually used PyCaret, to be totally honest with you. So keen to hear any feedback that you have there with Debrata as well.
Yeah, do guys, send your ways of doing things, because everyone has got a different way of achieving the outcome, right? So yeah, it's just a personal choice, I would say. And I think we got some very good comments. Like James mentioned that like Leon, we are currently looking at implementing Power BI Premium as part of a BI strategy. So this is a great timing that you're delivering this session. So I guess James, you are also planning to use some of the machine learning capabilities with the premium licensing thing. So I think glad you joined us, and hopefully the session really helped, because it was an amazing session, at least from my point of view. So hopefully it helps you guys. And then Idris mentioned again another thing, like these guys have been using Orange data mining tool for this, but obviously now they're keen to try the premium user licensing in Power BI to deep dive into this topic. So that's another good feedback that you've got.
Fantastic. We have some new users, which is great.
yeah, I think that's really great. And everyone is kind of really giving you good feedback, Leon. Very insightful presentation. Power BI is really very helpful. So thanks for sharing this with us. Great presentation. Thank you, Leon. And very informative, very impressive. Thank you for the presentation, Leon. Very clear and concise. So you have got quite good feedback in there. And guys, please do fill in the feedback link that I have shared, because this just helps us in improving our future webinars. So it will be really great if you guys can just spend 10 seconds to fill that link, so we can just bring the right content to you from the next week onwards. So do take some time and fill out that presentation. That feedback. So Leon, how are you feeling after your session?
It's very hot in here at the moment.
It's quite hot here as well.
A lot of systems are running, but no, it's really interesting. Like I say, to hear the feedback. We've never presented back to the community as of yet. We've always put on the webinars and had guest speakers as such. We've been doing this for a long time now, so it's nice to actually be able to present to our own user group, and also see the feedback that comes in as well. Very aware, like I say, that we do put together a lot of information to take in within this session. It's unavoidable, unfortunately, because I do see the benefits in seeing how to do this for free as well. But hopefully everybody's learned something. And as I mentioned, everybody's continually learning, ourselves included. So if there's anything that you want to come back to us with in terms of feedback or alternative ways, or even newer things to try, then please feel free to.
Yeah, thanks everyone, for joining us, because I think the amount of audience, when we see this much turnout, then it just motivates us to bring the right content and right speaker for you guys. So please keep on joining us in our upcoming sessions, and do subscribe our YouTube channel, because the session what Leon just gave today will be available soon on our YouTube channel. So if you have missed out anything, you can just go and watch that recording again. And obviously please come and join our user group on LinkedIn. We have got a meetup page as well, so please come and join us there. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. We look forward to seeing you there. And Pragati, thank you very much for hosting as well. You did an absolutely amazing job.
Oh, thanks, Leon. Obviously, I'm here for that, right? So
I might be out of a job now. But no, as I say, thank you everybody for joining us. This has been brought to you in association with Pomerol Partners, and I will allow Pragati to have the final sign off for today.
yeah, thanks everyone. I mean, I think that was my final sign off. Thanks everyone. Thanks Leon for coming on this platform and giving a session for us and sharing your knowledge with us. So yeah, thanks everyone, and yeah, keep posting your feedback for us, and yeah, I mean, just get back to us if you really feel like we should change something, modify something, the way we are bringing the content and the way we are, I mean, the speakers that we're getting for you. And even, you know, in the feedback link, you can just write the topics that you are really keen to learn about, right? Especially about Power BI. If there's some new feature that has come up in Power BI and you really want someone to, you know, talk about that feature, then yeah, do let us know, because this is a community event, right? And we are giving back to the community. So it's good to give back to the community the right content. So please feel free to fill that feedback so that, you know, we can bring the right content for you. So thanks everyone, and thanks for joining all of us from around the world. And thanks Leon again. It was a great presentation.